they would get £42,000 a year. If Francis Maud works until he's 60 years old, he will earn over £50,000 per year in salary. And he tells us that we are being greedy and selfish. I would say we do not need to negotiate any further reductions of our pensions with people like Francis Maud and his crew. We need to keep up the pressure on the government, and we need to let the government know that this is not just a one-off, one-day protest. This is an ongoing campaign that will overturn their present policy of robbing our pensions. As I said at the beginning, it's been decades and decades since the British Labour movement has stood united like this, with all the unions standing united, coming together, supporting each other in a solidarity that's going to bring the power of the working people to bear on this Eton educated millionaire Tory government. There is a simple message from today's magnificent act of defiance. Cameron, Maud, Alexander and Gove. We've negotiated our pensions, we've signed up to our pension schemes when we got our job, we've been poorly paid, and we've paid into our pensions every week, every month, every year, and we're going to enjoy our pensions, and we're not going to have them robbed by you and your Tory millionaire thankful friends. So the message is, Cameron, get your thieving hands off our pensions. 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 Well done, congratulations.
Response to the turnout that you've seen today, what do you think that could have achieved?
We were delighted with the turnout today. It was more than double that we expected. The police had estimated that there was going to be 1,000, and instead the confirmed there was more than 2,000 there today. It was great to see so many unions involved right across the public sector and some private sector unions. I think it sent a really clear message that ordinary people, ordinary workers are prepared to stand up and fight to protect their pensions and are not prepared to be the ones that are scapegoated and have to pay for the deficit caused by bankers' irresponsibilities and the banking bailout.
I think the protest has been primarily about pensions, but do you think there are a lot of other issues involved?
I think there was a whole lot of other issues there, and some of the speakers did mention those. Clearly the key issue and what we balloted was on pensions, but that's in a context of there's been a public sector pay freeze for 2 years. It's likely to continue, maybe with a maximum of 1% rise next year after Judge Osborne's announcements. We've had mass redundancies to cope with. So there's a lot of anger out there in the public sector.
What would you offer if you were to say there is a solution to this kind of deficit and this kind of treatment of public sector workers? What would you
Well, it's one of the things I said in my speech, that every year the government gives away £10 billion in tax relief to the richest 1% on their pensions. Now, I can't see how on earth anybody can think it's fair to try and cut £2 billion a year from public sector pensions whilst at the same time still continuing to give £10 billion away to the richest 1%. So that's where I'd certainly start on pensions.
Okay.
And I'd be in favour of a much more progressive system of taxation in general to make the people who cause this crisis pay for it rather than ordinary working people.
David Cameron was heard to say that this strike would cost the country billions. How do you respond to that sort of comment?
Well, I'm not sure where he gets his figures from. I have to point out that taking strike action is a last resort for most of our members and members of the other unions. We don't want to be on strike, we don't want to close schools, and we certainly don't want to deprive children of a day's education. But this is rich coming from a Prime Minister who's in charge of a government that has cut education funding, health funding, right across the public sector, making many of our members redundant, working in key services like special needs and language support, educational psychologists. We've seen hundreds and hundreds of job losses just in Blackburn alone. So it's quite rich for him to say that and blame us. This isn't a crisis of our making. What we want out of this is the government to sit down and negotiate properly in good faith and forget the rhetoric that they keep. I mean, it's absolutely rubbish what's been suggested, and this constant, and it's one of those things, if they repeat it enough, people will start to believe it, that public sector pensions are gold-plated. Well, the average public sector pension is only £7,000. The average teacher's pension is only £10,000. If you want gold-plated sectors, you have got to go and work for a bank or one of the big industries, you know, where you get your hundreds of £1,000s pensions. So, you know, and this deliberate attempt to try and divide the public and the private sector and to say that our pensions are better than most in the private sector, that might be true, but by worsening our pensions, it's not going to make private sector pensions any better. What they need to do is actually legislate to make sure that everybody in the private sector has access to a decent state pension, a decent occupational pension as well. So we're not all relying on state benefits when we get older. I don't think we've done this with any sense of glee whatsoever. Yes, there's a degree of camaraderie on these days. People are emboldened by seeing all their other workers out together, standing together. It's what trade unionism's all about, and it does make you feel that, and remind everybody that we're part of the many, not the privileged few that have caused this problem. So in that sense, people feel buoyed up by it. But most teachers actually, and you know, other public sector workers, health workers, I think, you know, they take strike action with a very heavy heart because we feel we've been backed into a corner with nothing else to do. And, you know, we're not going to let the government get away with it. We can't let the government get away with it. So, you know, we're making our stand.
We're talking in retrospect now of the strikes. This is the day after the strikes. And my first question to you is, what was your personal reason for striking?
As a union member, I believe that we should follow the advice that our teaching unions give us. If ballots have been conducted correctly, properly, then I feel it's really important that we do take a firm standpoint, and if we present a united front, then perhaps the government will have to take account of the fact that there are a very large number of disgruntled people out there who are not in agreement with the government proposals.
There are obviously a number of issues in the strikes. The central one was about pensions, but what do you think are the central issues as well as that?
Personally, and friends who I've spoken to feel very much that we have been misled and sort of sold up the river almost, really, that things were promised that are now being taken away from people.
Such as?
And that it's not fair to make promises and to have people paying into pension funds for numerous years to then find out that they're not actually worth the paper that they're written on.